In this episode, we'll try to find out how many kids in China are like these and enjoy playing football. Having a lot of kids play football is the first step in developing a strong youth football culture. More kids involved in the game means more talent and more attention to the sport. So getting kids to play is an obvious first step in developing youth football. So the question is, exactly how many kids in China enjoy playing football?
It was back in 1990 when I first looked into and researched China's youth football community. Then I realised that youth football was on the edge of collapsing. We went to 16 cities and saw that only the big cities like Beijing and Shanghai have 1,000 players each, but the rest of the smaller places just have a few hundred. With 10 age groups in China, there are only 10,000 players in total.
The biggest problem facing Chinese football is the population. It's very, very small. It's hard to get numbers from the FA. The last numbers that I've seen that were published by the China Football Association suggested there were about 50,000 children that are engaged in football regularly.
My city's population is 3.8 million, but every year we keep track of how many kids playing football. Up to now, only 400 kids are playing the game.
So what do these numbers mean if we were to compare them to other countries with stronger youth football communities?
Now if we were to compare that with England, there are something like 3.9 million children involved in football. So unless the CFA numbers are wrong in some way, it's a ridiculous difference.
People always say, with a population as large as China's, why can't we find 11 players? In reality, we really can't, because there simply aren't many people playing the game in China. If we think about the 5-1 defeat against Thailand a year ago, nobody could accept what happened.
Chinese fans will want to forget their latest friendly. After 2 defeats in the last 2 games, China lost yet again yesterday, but this was a new low. 5-1 the final score.
But to be honest, I wasn't surprised, because simply Thailand has almost 1 million kids playing football, so we couldn't compete.
Japan has 91,000 youth football players right now. Every football club has youth football training, and each one has more than 100 kids.
In many leading football nations, they talk about a percentage of 5 to 7% of children that are involved and engaged in the game of football. If we were to take 5 to 7% of China's youth population, I mean, you can probably tell me how much that would be, but it will be several tens of millions of children. So if it is indeed true that the CFA figures show 50,000 children engaged in football, then it seems to me very, very clear why Chinese football has been so poor. Hardly anyone plays it.
In terms of total population, England has about 50 million people, while China holds 1.36 billion people. If China had the same proportion of youth football players as England, there would be around 106 million young footballers in the country. If China had just 10% of that, then China would still have a youth football community over 10.5 million strong, around 2.5 times that of England. And if China could only claim 3% of that 106 million, then China would still have at least 3.18 million young football players in the country. Unfortunately, the real number is much smaller. Based on Zhang Lu's 1990 findings, China only had 10,000 youth football players in the entire country. Fast forward 20 or so years, how many youth players are in the sport now? Based on the latest data provided by the CFA, the number of registered youth football players in China come out to be 35,274. In contrast, Japan has 910,000 youth football players. So that means the Chinese youth football community pales in comparison to Japan and England, and is a far cry from where China is supposed to be if China wants to hold the same numbers proportionally as England. So it looks like not many kids in China are playing football. But is that really the case? According to FIFA's website, China has more kids playing football than anywhere in the world, but over 25 million of them are unregistered. So with two different sets of numbers, do either of them really paint an accurate picture of how football is played among China's youth? And do these numbers even matter in the discussion?
It really depends on which method you use to calculate the amount of kids playing football and how you define a youth football player. A student that spends 3 hours per week playing football counts as a youth football player.
It's very interesting the different ways that you calculate what is a football player and who is a football player, whether registered or not. And this comes back to the fundamental difference between football in say Europe and football in China. So when we say there are 3 or 4 million kids playing soccer in England, we mean they're all affiliated, because everyone's affiliated all the way down to the Sunday club that plays in the park or the school team. In China, almost no one is affiliated. I think maybe you said 90% is not affiliated. So that's the difference. There are, of course, hundreds of thousands, millions of people playing football in China. There have to be, there just simply has to be. But they're not registered. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. They're not members of a team that plays in a league that's registered. So the whole thing is just floating there in an unknown market.
Now everyone is doing shows about football to discuss the future of the sport, but everybody, me included, seems to fail to do one thing, and that is provide a comprehensive look at Chinese youth football, a report that clearly defines what the football community is. If we consider kids who play football twice a week each time for more than 30 minutes as part of this community, then we are looking at 190,000 youth football players in China. 190,000 is enough for China to build a healthy football system. However, thanks to this poorly developed registry system, we lost track of many of them, which is a shame.
Now, things weren't always like this. In fact, in the early 90s, football was booming in China, and kids would fill up schools wanting to learn how to play. But problems started to come out in China's Super League, and people started to lose their faith and interest in the sport.
Once there was a time when I was in elementary school when everybody was playing football, and that was the time when youth football was booming. Parents were encouraging their kids to play at the time so they could stay in the city and avoid being sent back to the rural towns. That was the height of football in China back then.
Due to the spirit of the times, football schools in China were booming around the late 80s thanks to the China League. People started to feel like now might be the time for Chinese football to really grow. Lots of people and money started to pour into the football industry, but the prosperity didn't last.
Now football is experiencing a resurgence here in China. But is this just history repeating itself?
We plan to launch our campus football program to 20,000 schools in China in the next 3 years. If each school has 1,000 kids play football, then we will have 20 million young football players in that time span.
A new leader comes into a football association and immediately says, right, let's sort it out. Let's really shake things up and make Chinese football work. I need results within 3 years, most 4 years. I am telling you now, and I can tell everyone on TV now and everyone in China now, there is no 3-year solution. It's a 30-year solution.
After doing my research, I told everyone China football is hopeless. I'm very confident in my beliefs. Why? Because the football foundation built by the football community is way too weak.
So is there any hope left for a revitalization of the youth football community here in China? And is there any corner in the country where people still enjoy this sport? Stay tuned for our next episode where we head to the Yulong Snowy Mountains and try to find out why the football community is so strong there.